Hello, and welcome to today's event, How Government Agencies Address Transparency Demands. I am Dr. Craig Ogeron, a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government and professor of MIS at Millsaps College. I'm absolutely thrilled to serve as the moderator. Joining me today to discuss this timely topic are Carrie Stieglitz, the president of Campos Sage, and Grant Rubel, director of customer success at Kahua. I want to kind of set the stage for our conversation today. Public transparency requirements are very widespread and greatly influence the outcome of construction projects. As these requirements continue to increase, government agencies face growing scrutiny, intensified pressure to deliver projects on time and within budget, and the responsibility to provide timely and accurate updates to stakeholders. By using technology, agencies can ensure accountability in project and cost management. However, despite these efforts, and we all know this, things can still go awry. Centralizing the management of multiple funding sources, costs, and project components provides complete visibility. This data empowers agencies to identify and address issues that may have occurred during these challenges that crop up. So we very much appreciate your participation today as we discuss the transparency challenges and opportunities for state and local agencies with Carrie and Grant. We're also going to explore actionable steps to enhance transparency, improve oversight, optimize reporting, and importantly, foster stakeholder engagement and trust. Okay, so before our panel gets started, we're going to have just another poll question. So what we wanted to ask in this poll question is, in your opinion, what is the most critical factor in ensuring public organizations and federal agencies are prepared to contribute to accountability and transparency? So we have some choices for you. Is it governance and controls? That is, ensuring organizational procedures are followed to gather timely and accurate data? Is it cloud-hosted data storage to ensure that the data is accessible remotely, that is, through various devices, phones, tablets, laptops, or any other internet-based tools? Is it possibly enterprise software solutions that rise to the top, standardized tools to assist in delivering organization-specific processes required to ensure accountability and transparency? Or lastly, is it security, data security? That is, ensuring digital information is safeguarded from unauthorized access, accidental loss, or manipulation. So if you can take a minute and jot down what you think for us there, we would be greatly appreciative in terms of those factors which are most important. Okay, let's sort of take a look at where we landed here. This one will be interesting, I think, from a results perspective. So about a third so far in governance, another third in software, and slightly under that with security. So evenly spread, with the cloud coming in at about a little under 7%. So thank you very much for doing those poll questions with us. Okay, Carrie and Grant, we've collected some data. And as we head into our discussion, I'd like to ask each of you to take just a few minutes to comment on the poll results and highlight your thoughts. What unique complexities or challenges, even limitations or impediments, are state and local government leaders really dealing with out there? Either one, jump in.
Well, no, I'm happy to jump in there, Craig. So thanks again for having me on, and for everybody who just went ahead and responded to the question there. Appreciate your participation. So a couple thoughts just to kind of kick it off based on the results there. I appreciated the even spread across the different answers. I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at accountability and transparency and costs, it really is both a technological process that needs to be put in place, as well as the operational side of the house. So I think looking at what we saw up there, I appreciated seeing governance and controls coming in around 33%, then enterprise tools and data security holding the same. Carrie, I'd be interested in your thoughts there too.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at 20 years ago when we kind of started trying to, or when I personally started trying to help increase transparency, we relied a lot on process and governance in order to do that, right? Making sure that people were following processes and procedures that had been approved, forms that had been built in a certain way, Word, Excel, things like that. Um, and I remember back then, a lot of the conversation was, okay, how do we get this in a more digital format, working with database, Excel, but some of those issues, Excel is not very transparent, it's not team oriented. And in those days, we had people reporting up to about a 30% inefficiency just chasing down information in projects. So the fact that project managers and project teams couldn't even have that information at their fingertips just kind of increased the ability to not have that real-time transparency that was needed. And because it wasn't in a IT system, it's a lot easier to have loss of controls. Maybe it's being shared with the wrong people. And so that has been really something that we've seen kind of more recently enhance the ability to provide that one source of truth that everybody can be looking at on the project team.
Yeah, Grant, let me just pivot to you real quick. So
Yeah.
Carrie mentioned this 30% loss in productivity. Does that sort of match some of your experiences over time that you've seen organizations struggle with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely consistent, but I would say there's kind of an underlying trend even below that. And it's the fact that there's a ton of rework that just goes into setting up standards and iterating through your internal procedures as you implement them. I mean, when I look at some of the scenarios that we face on a day-to-day basis implementing technology, right? You can set standards and then you can try and tie that to a technology. But if you didn't have a good vision and you didn't have good OCM or change management procedures, then a lot of times is what we'll see is organizations can really struggle to implement a technology in alignment with those governance and controls that we were talking about in the poll question. So I think when you look at the rework, it's not only on the execution once you have something rolled out, it's also looking at kind of the underlying theme of transitioning into a more operational excellence program where you have technology and operations and controls in place. So I would definitely agree with that. And I think we see it day in and day out as a technology provider.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrie, let me pivot back to you because you were sort of talking about your time in the industry. So during that time, we've seen an increased scrutiny surrounding accountability and data transparency. So specific to that, I'm interested in what trends you've seen across government agencies as they've kind of continued to evolve and adapt to newer technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when data security really started coming into play when we, around the 9/11 time period, where we realized, hey, we're actually very exposed. One of the biggest trends that I saw, believe it or not, was a lot of people moving to clouds that were hosted by more secure providers. So that was a big movement that I saw. It was a little slow sometimes in government to move to the cloud, but as the cloud was able to provide assurances around data security, folks began to realize, hey, if I use this other cloud, they're throwing a lot more people on data security than I could ever within my own organization. And so it actually became safer to move your data into the cloud than to have it on premise. So that was a huge shift that I saw. The second thing being, especially with some executives pushing for dashboards, transparency, analytics. We're talking about AI in the industry now. A lot of folks really want to try to take advantage of these things, but the reality is that a lot of folks are still trying to get their data in a digital format. And so there's still that step that you have to take as part of a digital transformation journey, where step one is getting it in a system like a project management system. so that now that data is in a digital format, you can take advantage of workflow, you can take advantage of using that information for benchmarking. And so that's kind of a journey that I'm seeing. Everybody I talk to wishes they were further along, but the reality is we're all kind of in that spot right now.
Yeah, I wanted to comment. You make me think of a situation, being a CIO, of that move to the cloud that you talked about. One of the first projects that we did, and I think these metrics are just burned on my brain of living through it, but we saw a cost reduction of 72% and a scalable increase of 4,000%, right? So you sort of speak to that sort of as a baseline to be able to do these things, right? Whether it's sharing data, that kind of thing. So Grant, let me just pivot to you on that question. I mean, kind of similar thoughts there on the security piece and sort of the scalability and agility on the cloud side?
Yeah, I mean, I think is what I would primarily want to hit on, just to not overlap on what Carrie was saying. But I'd add on to her last comment around setting the foundation in terms of technology. I think, it's interesting. I came from a background in consulting where I was focused on enterprise cloud implementations, and coming over to this industry and focusing on primarily the built environment, I've noticed the difference in terms of the maturity from a foundational technology perspective for a lot of these organizations. Carrie was mentioning the concept of having a PMIS in place or just doing basic data analytics, right? As compared to, we talk a lot about AI now, we talk about modular construction, a lot of cool new technologies. But at the end of the day, when I compare it to kind of my past experience looking at other industries, I feel like where we really fall short in construction right now is that foundational component. Before you get kind of head over heels to start working on, AI and putting robotics into actual action in the field, you need to take a step back and look at the foundational elements of data storage, making sure that you have a solution that's enterprise-wide that can help standardize your processes and controls. And from there, you can start doing what I would call basic analytics prior to moving into the advanced analytics and then maturing from there. I do think it's really interesting. One of our partners, KPMG, just recently released their global construction survey. They survey, 250 different organizations and ask about trends in the industry and collect a lot of good feedback. And one of the key takeaways from that I had is, organizations are reporting still that only 46% and 45% are using a PMIS or basic analytics respectively, right? And so that's under 50% of organizations that are relatively mature, right? That are responding to this survey. So when we look at really the foundational components of meeting some of the transparency and cost projection needs of organizations in today's state, I still feel like we are a little bit behind in terms of catching up to the foundational technological components are needed.
I love the way you say that, because I think thinking of it in a, because you used this word too, kind of in a maturity model, kind of a maturation, I think is really critical. And that's really a point worth repeating, right? I don't think that, and I think Carrie mentioned this too, right? There's a lot more of these technologies that are out there that are just so powerful, but you've got to have that foundational piece. You both talked about it, especially on the data side, right? I mean, what we're talking about here in a PMIS is, you have to have data of all sorts and kinds, really, not just to manage well, to be transparent, but ultimately on the analytics side. So Grant, let me kind of double click on that. In your opinion, and we kind of hinted at this, but what do you find public sector agencies struggling with? What are the challenges or barriers in effectively utilizing this kind of technology for project and cost management accountability, specifically on the public sector side?
Yeah. I'll kind of take a step back on that and give a story behind it, because I think it does tie in pretty nicely. But I look at one of the projects that I worked on, again, prior to Kahua, but it was for the USDA, Department of Agriculture, and they were prepping for the US Data Act of 2014. So in 2014, there's a new legislation, Digital Transformation and Accountability Act, that really its primary goal was to consolidate all federal award data into a single open source website. Effectively, it's called usaspending.gov today if you go to it and check it out. But back in 2014, that legislation was passed, and the goal was to have by 2017 in May, all federal agencies providing their very first take on their reporting in the new structure, right? So when we look at this, they gave a 3-year lead time, and you kind of take a holistic, broad view at this, trying to figure out how do we solve this problem as a consultancy, which is what I was working at the time. And you say, well, there's 2 primary factors, right? There's a cultural factor, and then there's a technological factor. And I kind of roll operations into cultural, quite frankly. So there's kind of the one side of the fence that says, okay, we have 3 years to really start reporting to the federal government with the goal of this being standardized by 2022. So a very long lead time. What do we do to really get going? Well, some of the first things you have to do is say, well, what types of data are they requiring now? So understand from the Treasury, what are they going to require from us as an agency? Do we have that data, right? Operationally, do we collect it? Is it stored in a system? Is it stored through data calls that we collect on an ongoing basis? How do we get that data? And then finally, we need to get our people to get excited about it, right? At the end of the day, if they're not excited and they feel it's just another bureaucratic process to provide information to the federal government and publicize it to the public, they're not feeling like they're getting any value out of it, right? So you look at it and you say, culturally, how do we define how we're going to collect this information, provide this information, and get buy-in across our organization? And then you look at it technologically and you say, well, actually, what systems do we have? What information is collected within that system? And is it reportable today? Does it require customization to report it tomorrow, right? Are we able to be flexible and agile and meet these needs, or do we need to implement another system? So there's a lot of considerations that go into this. But if I boil them up, I would say really it's understanding your culture, understanding, are your people willing to buy in? Do you have the operations in place? Do you have the personnel in place? And then also from a technological side, do you have the systems in place that are able to accommodate the requests of the government? And I would kind of say that the final piece to this is really one lesson learned for overcoming, I'd say, more the cultural barrier. And we actually practice this today. So we coach this within our organization, and we work with Carrie quite a bit. And I know she coaches a very similar model. But if you can encourage the user of the technology or the user of the data that's being reported to really buy in and care about that as their single source of truth, then people start to adopt that platform, right? If they're looking at it and saying, well, I have to put my information in here because someone else needs it, then they're probably not going to be as operationally efficient, right? They're going to look at that as data entry, just I'm just going to put that in, I'm going to manage my business over here. But if you can get those organizations and those people to say, I'm actually going to leverage that tool to do my job, and it effectively is impacting me, it's not just a reporting tool, then we really can clear up a lot of the data discrepancies. We can provide true data to the public. And again, going back to transparency and accountability, that's really the root of it, is ensuring buy-in across your organization culturally. So.
Yeah, one of the things I hear when you talk about that, the cultural piece, is the value piece, right? I've got to have that sense that there's value. Carrie, let me just jump over and have you kind of comment on that. I'm really fascinated by the cultural piece. I think it's a part of transformation. It's a part of building that foundation that a lot of times gets left behind. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I definitely echo Grant's comments there. I would say, just to put a slightly different slant on it too, the cultural piece of it that we're seeing shifting, especially, in project management in general, but construction tend to be very large projects, a lot of cash flowing through, is also the concept of the owner actually being the one who owns that project data. So not just a cultural shift from, hey, this is going to be adding value to you, it's going to make your life easier, you can go on vacation and not have to, hand over all of your project notes or try to translate that over. But it's also one where conceptually it's, hey, as an owner, I'm the one that owns my data, and shifting that culturally to the contractor provides the project management tool and the cost management tool, and they do it and then tell me how my project is doing, to as an owner, I actually have transparency over this information because it's in my database, is a really big shift. But you said the word value, and I 100% agree. You have to have value added. A lot of folks, when they're looking at implementing technology can do a lot of really great things, but you don't have to, boil the whole ocean with your first step into using a project management system or a cost management system. It's really, what are the things that add the most value? So as an example, one of the folks we were working with, they really wanted to focus in on their invoice processing time. So the time that the invoice came in to the time it exited. So first we kind of did a process map of that to understand what the baseline time frame was. But then we were able to actually track via workflow. So the contractor would actually log into their system, upload the invoice, then it would go through digital workflow. And so if you're talking about adding value, there's value to the contractor because they know that their invoice was accepted. They know where it is in the workflow. You're adding value to the project team because they don't have to chase down, where's my contractor's invoice? Finance is getting value because they're getting better information on cash flow. So just these individual business processes, you can identify the value. And then once everybody does that, they go, great, let's really lean into this, because everybody along that chain of events is actually getting value out of that.
Yeah, and I mean, not only is, that value getting created, right? I mean, sort of that argument that is created, to Grant's point, it's not this extra thing I have to do, but then I think you're maybe capturing it, right? And it's not necessarily a specific monetizing of the value, but it could be efficiencies, as you talked about in your opening, right? It could be getting that 30% back, right? Because that can be very impactful for the organization. Well, Carrie, you had jumped to what was on my mind. You talked about this this invoicing as sort of an example or case studies. Are there any others that are top of mind? I love the invoicing one because it's something that everybody is challenged with. Are there any other examples or case studies that are top of mind in terms of utilizing technology for these sorts of things?
Definitely. And, Kahua did not pay us to say this, but one of the reasons we love tools like Kahua is because, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, the ability to kind of adapt and configure without a very expensive implementation, it makes it so much easier on us. We focus first on business process, but then at some point you need to bring technology into it to kind of enforce some of those digital practices. So that invoice process that I was talking to you about, that was an agency we were working with where it was almost entirely a paper process. I can remember another airport we were working with where they had a similar challenge. And then, one of the things that they had, though, is they had a very consensus-based organization, which I'm going to add a little sarcasm in here, never ever happens in public agencies. There's never consensus-based decision-making going on. It's actually one of the reasons I love working in the public sector. But because of that, the process itself was slowed down because it went through a lot of steps, but nobody actually realized how many approval steps and how many review steps it was going through until they tried to actually move it into a digital workflow. So once we kind of documented, hey, here's all the people that need to review it, here's all the people that need to approve it, management was like, hold on a second, no, the delegation of authority, we can go here, but we are also able to copy all of those people and notify the people. So going back to that cultural shift, they still were part of the process, but the actual approval steps were able to significantly decrease in duration. Also, from the perspective of, we talked about value. It is a soft value, right? Saving people's time is something not as quantifiable as some other things, but another recent implementation that we just worked through, they were able to really save a lot of manual processing that happened because they needed that data transparency. They had their own access database in addition to the enterprise financial system, which happens a lot in our implementations. Projects want to level, they want to level down of cost transparency than a lot of enterprise financial systems do. But the financial system is always the system of truth. So how do you reconcile that need that somebody who's managing a project needs to manage 10, 12 levels deeper than finance actually wants to manage that? So we were able to actually allow for that and automatically map it through integration back to the financial system. So that project manager can manage it at their 50 plus lines of detail. But when it came into the financial system, complete transparency, error handling, all the fun stuff, it went back into that financial system at the higher level of detail. So kind of preserving both folks and both views of how they wanted to see the information.
Yeah, Carrie, one of the things you talked about that I loved was sort of potential blind spots in some of these processes, right? Sort of the not realizing that this thing may have many more steps than is needed, right? Whether you're creating a process, you're automating a paper process. I think it's pretty fascinating. So Grant, I mean, other things have come up, right? We've touched on some value. The word culture has come up. We're talking a lot about technology, but in addition to those factors, what other kinds of things play into having an effective accountability and transparent, kind of system in government agencies? What else is at play?
For me, one thing that we haven't talked too much about today is really the strategy or the overarching kind of plan that goes behind this stuff. I would say, just from my past experience, the organizations that apply the resources and plan accordingly are by far the most successful in attaining their goals, right? I mean, you can always look back and look at your schedule at the end of a project, and odds are your schedule does not match, the actuals. But at the end of the day, the better planning and the more focus that you can apply, the better off you're going to be. And I mean, I give a nice example of this. One of our customers, they're utilizing Kahua not only to manage their projects, but also to provide information to the community, right? So they are required to provide information. They're a public entity. So one of their goals while implementing our solution was to say, okay, well, how do we capture the information that the community will care about, right? How do we make sure that we have dashboards in place? How do we make sure that we have reports in place that we can provide that meet the needs of the stakeholders that just aren't within our organization? So the way that they did that is they planned accordingly, starting with the end in mind, having an idea and a strategy for a timeline on how they're going to commit to getting to that end goal. And what they found throughout that is they applied the right amount of resources. They took the implementation seriously. They worked with some of our partner organizations. They worked with us. And we were able to basically roll it out much more seamlessly than some organizations when you do look at it and you say, okay, well, you know what? We need technology. Well, if you don't really think through what needing technology means, you might end up just piloting a bunch of different projects and end up, never coming to a full solution. So, we haven't talked too much about planning, but I like the idea of really starting with the end in mind and saying, what is my end goal and why am I investing in this technology? I mean, I'll go back to, the story I was telling earlier about the Data Act. I don't know if Nick Bedois is listening, but poor Nick was in the middle of helping build out the dashboards within SAP. They were leveraging SAP data to report out to the federal government, up to OMB and the Treasury Department. And at the end of the day is what they knew from a USDA and my client's perspective was, well, we have to meet this deadline, right? And so therefore meeting the deadline means taking our data and putting it in the format that they need. But what they found throughout the implementation was we could use this data ourselves, right? Now that we're consolidating and we're making consistency and building procedures for collecting this type of information on our awards that are offered, we now can utilize this for our own benefit. So that turned into hey, let's build this dashboard, let's build this dashboard, let's build this dashboard, right? Instead of planning ahead of time and saying, what do I want my end goal to look like? And then building the process and building the information gathering into that. So we speak, we're talking about other types of barriers. I think that is one of them. It's just effective planning and taking your technological investments very seriously.
I have to say I love that, because I do think that even in 2023, there is a lot of attitude surrounding technologies and Elixir. And if you just sort of say it and there's pixie dust and things are going to get better, I think it sounds so obvious when you say it, of marrying it with, business objectives, business outcomes, wrapping it in planning and strategy. But Carrie, let me pivot to you, because this stakeholder word cropped up, and I know sort of in the public CIO community, many times, the technology is the technology, right? We stand up a network, or we stand up solutions, or we stand up, virtual clouds for other people's to utilize. But I'm really interested in your opinion on partnerships and collaborations. So, what kind of partnerships or collaborations do you think are necessary for public sector agencies to really leverage technology fully for project and cost management? That is much more, I think, the world we live in today. So what is top of mind there?
Yeah, well, something that definitely comes to mind is, and this is not consistent across all agencies, of course, but one thing that I tend to notice as a trend is that the actual internal staff that's managing a project or cost is a lot lighter than the external stakeholders that are helping to manage that. And we've definitely seen a shift in how that partnering works with those suppliers. We've definitely in the last 5 to 10 years seen the introduction of an integrated project team, changes to procurements, contract templates to be more collaborative, not just sticks, but carrots too, built into the contracts and things like that. But, from whenever I think of collaboration or partnerships, the first thing that comes to mind are those external providers that are part of the project team. They're either staff augmentation, they're actual contractors, they're maybe supplementary project management teams, program managers, and that's starting early on, right? So talking about carrots and sticks, when we talk about designing how our contracts are built and how we work with them, that is the framework and foundation for any sort of internal technology that you might have. So making sure your contracts are enforcing, hey, you're going to be using our technology to be managing this project. You submit our invoices to our financial system, our PMIS. So getting them on board really early in the bidding process so they can appropriately plan for that. Licensing always is a question that comes up, but moreover than not, it's finding those right suppliers that do want to collaborate and not just caring about their own data and their own success, but also the owner's data and the owner's success as well, that they see that exchange happening. And sometimes that takes a little more upfront conversation, takes more of a partnering mentality instead of the contractor as the enemy, and that's a huge shift as well.
Yeah, fabulous. Grant, let me pivot to you on that exact topic that Carrie was talking about in terms of partnerships and collaborations. What is top of mind for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do have a bit of a different perspective on this just because of my background, right? Yeah. But it's generally a battle, right? It's a big, heavy lift to implement new controls, new governments, do assessment across your organization on operational efficiency, look at new tools, look at implementations. I mean, at the end of the day, I think when I hear the words, collaboration, I think of partnerships. And so Carrie spoke specifically to the actual execution of, construction and contracts and the external collaboration for, working with the different trades and building out an actual, whatever it is that you're building. But for me, I'm looking at it more from a technological sense. And I say, well, expertise is really gained through experience working with various different organizations that are similar to yours, right? And I think when I look at the model that I've seen be most effective is when you do have a trusted advisor helping guide you who's been in another organization's shoes before, right? That can be internal or external. I mean, at the end of the day, the way that Kahua likes to do it, I can just speak to our organization. We emphasize our partner program. We love our partner program for a reason. We look to find organizations that have experience working with our customers, working with organizations similar to our customers, and that we can trust to go learn their business and really spend the time to make sure that an implementation is successful. So I look at organizations, again, like Campo Sage and Carey. We've worked together on several different customers, and we know that they'll spend the diligence to look into the business side of the house, not just the technology side. We're not just going to roll something out. We're going to ensure that we understand the way that they want to do business as a customer. And then our partner organization can go and build out whatever is required for them to make sure that they're successful. I mean, I look at the specific example that Carey was just speaking to, right? When organizations are looking at implementing a system with the goal, again, of having cost transparency or financial accountability within their organization, odds are they know what they need, but they don't really know all the executable steps that go into it. When we look at Carey's organization or someone like that, they can come in and help understand the needs, coach through pros and cons of different ways of doing it, ensure that some of the things that might slip through the cracks, like a training plan, can be developed, making sure that the system can be tailored specifically to those needs. There's just a lot of support that goes into it. So when I think of collaboration, I think of it from the digital transformation side of the house. And how do you go about building something out that is successful specifically for that organization? The last little piece of information I'd add here is, I mean, Kahua is part of a research group. We're part of CII, and we love being a part of CII because we learn a ton. I get to learn a ton from that organization and the research that's put out. But CII even put out something recently where they were doing research around digital transformation. And I believe it was 70% or more of large enterprise initiatives included an external party to help support, right? So at the end of the day, it's taking an objective look at your organization, knowing that sometimes we can get tunnel vision when we're focused on our specific goal, and having an external source help kind of coach around pros and cons of doing things a certain way and really dig into the weeds and ensure that there's success in that type of initiative and the end goals are being met.
Yeah, I love that. I love the trusted advisor kind of model. I've had different experiences myself with that, and I think it's huge, especially especially in the public sector for sure. Okay, so I want to kind of pivot to this question that I want all of us to sort of chew on. Grant, I'll stick with you when I ask it, but this is both seemingly overly simplistic, but then maybe not. But I want to ask about measurement and evaluation of success when you're looking at implementing, this sort of kind of project or cost management accountability within public sector, right? There's probably normal kinds of metrics you would look at, but what is top of mind? And I'm going to come over to Carey as well. But when you think about measuring success, where is your head?
Yeah, do you want me to start on that, or did you
sure.
want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, for me, it does go back to the planning phase. If you plan accordingly, then you will set success metrics and you will identify goals that you need to attain. And throughout your journey, you will track against those goals. So I'd say just from a broad-based stroke, it is tracking towards your goals that are set at the beginning. But to be a little more tactical, for some things that I would say I view as successful, I look at end user adoption. If your people are using the tool and you're having conversation with others and they're saying, hey, this is helping me do my job, then that's a success factor, right? So that's something that's important to track. I would also say there's a natural progression that you just begin to notice. And I would say the easiest way to do it is by checking in once in a while with some of your managers or middle management level and just seeing how they're doing their job. But at the end of the day, it's tracking and seeing if they're using it without being asked to use it, right? So we'll do this sometimes as Kahua. we work with organizations and we'll just go and we'll check out, a customer and do a user experience day, right? And we'll just say, hey, let us just follow you around. Let's just see how your job's going, right? But then there's other things, a good example of this is something that we instituted internally. It's actually using our tool, but we built out some dashboards to help us track. We use some of our technology, said we're going to track things internally to make sure that we're progressing against our continuous improvement goals. And so naturally, if you're in a meeting and you say, hey, I'm working on this thing, let me just show it to you, right? And you find yourself using whatever you're trying to put in place, naturally, that's a success factor. So there's easy ways, again, to plan around that. I would say the hardest stuff to do is measure direct ROI. A lot of times people are like, well, what's the ROI on that investment? Really hard to gauge unless you're very strict about that from the beginning. But there are some easy ways just from being an outsider, kind of looking in and saying, hey, how's this going? Well, if they're using a tool, you're being successful. If they're not, or you've asked for a report and it's not able to be provided, that's probably where you need a little bit more help.
For sure. Carrie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would also echo that. There's, historically, technology implementations have not had a great reputation. And I think one thing that has really been missing is that goal setting, because they are soft benefits and typically not those hard benefits unless you're dealing with, something more like hardware or FTEs or something like that. It is harder to measure what success looks like. And so to counteract that, benefits realization management, upfront identification of the benefits that you're expecting to achieve, you can quantify those, but you need to socialize that this is not a hard benefit. It's a soft benefit that was jointly agreed upon as what this benefit would bring. But you can do that. And a lot of people think that that's a heavy lift, and it's not. The other thing we've done, but public agencies, when they start looking at how do I recognize the benefits, a lot of them think, well, something would be better than what we have now. And so just identifying what that looks like might also be a really good way to measure what success looks like. And then I can't, stress this enough. This is the same thing with any sort of, project management organization, a PMO, any major project. You also have to socialize your success as you're going along. So not just have those successes, but make sure that you're socializing that you are being successful. You have these early wins, you are getting adoption, because with these projects that have soft benefits, you really need to make sure that people know the benefits that were achieved by actually doing those pieces of work.
When you say that, Carrie, it kind of reminds me of sort of a flywheel mentality, like, getting the word out, building that momentum, and that momentum sort of builds that way. So, Carrie, let me stick with you and kind of ultimately ask, we've touched on a lot of fabulous things, both on the tech side and on the softer side today, but what ultimately recommendations or best practices do you have or can you suggest for public sector agencies looking to improve their utilization of technology? Are there, do you have that sort of, this is my list of 3 or, that kind of thing? What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely do. And these are the same questions we ask when we engage. One is, do you want the technology to match your current business process, or can you be flexible in your current business process to match technology? That's the number one question we ask, because that is going to play a huge factor in which technology you choose. A lot of, we kind of roll it out there, configuration, customization. Customization as it was 10 years ago is not the customization you see today. We have a lot of low-code options, just out-of-the-box configuration options. But knowing that going into it will play a huge factor in which technology you actually select. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, do you know your business process? And it's not a bad thing to not know your business process. A lot of folks we work with don't actually have a well-defined business process of who's accountable, who's responsible, who's actually required to review things and approve things. typically agencies have a delegation of authority, and that drives a lot of it, but everything in between is very gray. So it's just how much do you know your business process, and how much do you want to spend on that in improving how you do business before you consider technology? So that's the second thing. And then the third one is, what are your metrics and KPIs? What do you measure as an organization? Because that will narrow your window of what you want to implement for the first round. So, I mentioned boiling the ocean earlier. That's really something we want to avoid, that concept that everything has to be perfect and in place for us to roll it out. So a lot of times it's picking a small piece. Maybe it's just file management, document management, project delivery. Maybe it's just contract management and that process. So kind of understanding what is that narrowed list that would be a win to roll out first. Because going back to the success piece, if you're successful in that, people will come to you and start asking, hey, can we implement this process next? Because I saw value in what we did before.
Agreed. Love it. Grant, what is your short list on best practices and recommendations?
Yeah, I would just say, starting off, it is the strategic planning around what your end goals are. So go ahead and put those on paper first before you start doing anything over the top. What I like to see a lot of times with our customers and with some of the enterprise customers I've worked with in the past is setting up a steering committee. It's folks that are invested in the rollout of the technology, and they're strategically thinking about what the future looks like and how we're tracking towards those goals. If you can get executive leadership buy-in, and you can plan around what those end goals are, and get alignment up and down the organization, then odds are you'll be pretty successful. And then the other piece that I would say is, so that's more of the planning and strategy side. The other piece is your end user side, right? So focusing heavily on organizational change management. I referenced it before, but OCM is critical. I mean, by establishing a team that is focused on training, keeping up with users, ensuring that they know how to use the solution, documenting whatever those changes are. That is also something that's heavily important. So you kind of look at both ends of the spectrum, right? I look at the front end and then kind of carrying through the whole project. And that's what I would call a steering committee. That's invested resources that are focused on ensuring that this has a strategic direction. And then at the end of the stream, you have the OCM team too. And in the middle there, that's all the tactical planning, right? That's all the tactical planning, execution, testing that goes along with implementing solutions. So I think if you can plan on the front end and you can plan for the back end and the rollout, then you'll be very successful. In the middle there is just focused effort, and it's ensuring that the resources are taking it seriously and planning to schedule or following their schedule.
So a couple of wrap-up questions, Carrie and Grant, and something that's really top of mind that I wanted to just get your opinion about is, which I think showed up as a potential question: how can public sector agencies ensure inclusivity and accessibility when implementing project and cost management solutions? This is a topic near and dear to a lot of us in today's world. So any sort of some closing thoughts on inclusivity and accessibility? Carrie, I'll start with you on that. Anything top of mind there?
Yeah, well, a fun fact that many people don't know, I actually started out in the low vision and blindness industry. So, I started out really focusing on inclusivity and accessibility in software. And one thing that I've really appreciated, especially being driven by the federal government, is that requirement for a lot of softwares to be compliant. So as an example, Kahua is being used by GSA. So obviously that means all full accessibility requirements that you would need to kind of prove to be used in a federal space. But my personal experience is the use of screen readers to actually go through and navigate. So structured design and how you navigate or tab through software is something that we've always paid attention to as far as how it makes sense. But also, you know, when we're talking about inclusivity, it's for everybody. It's really being smart about the information that you're trying to gather and not having too much information on there so that folks that might, you know, not have full information to everything, that they're getting the right information on the right form, and that that's the minimum information needed. So from a technology standpoint, I hate to say it, but all the mainstream softwares are going to check that box off. But when we're talking about some of the softer sides of the edges, it's a lot of how do you design your forms, how do you actually click through the software, and being able to meet that overall navigation as well.
Yeah, that's huge. I had just been doing some work on some human-centered design stuff, so I think that really speaks to it well. Grant, thoughts on inclusivity and accessibility from your vantage point?
You know, I would just say working with a provider or a team that prioritizes that type of initiative is important. You know, I recall working with the 508 compliance team at the CDC when we were implementing different solutions. And as long as both teams are viewing it as a partnership, a lot of times you can have success in working around whatever requirements really are there. You know, CUA works with several different federal agencies. Carrie mentioned the GSA, but we also work with the VA and the Air Force and Department of State and a handful of other large federal entities. When we look at it, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to be a partner with those organizations. And so speaking to inclusivity and accessibility, you really need to identify teams that are going to prioritize you as a customer and work around whatever's needed for your organization. So, you know, I think that's kind of my basic response to that. But at the end of the day, it really is teamwork and collaboration. I know we hit on that several times throughout the webinar today.
Yeah, we did hit on it, and I think it's spot on. So with that, I really want to respect our 60-minute commitment. So we're going to have to wrap it up here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us for today's event. Thank you very, very much to my fellow speakers, Carrie and Grant. And of course, a very special thank you to our partners at CUA for enabling us to bring this worthwhile discussion to our audience today.